most of the mentors that I respect the most, and several of them I wrote about in my book, they spent lots and lots of time mentoring the next generation. Like, well, I'm just deciding which person I care about that I'm going to disappoint first. And then they're like, that person who was successful and had that great CV, that's not me anymore. That's a different person.
Is that we are the stories we tell.
And you can change your story. So that racing heart, that so sweaty palms, that deeper breathing, that's actually your body mobilizing resources to help you do well. You weren't uncertain of your knowledge of your domain. The internal contents of the thoughts of the people judging you were opaque to you.
Like one of the ladies told the Mars rover where to go every day, and I knew that in advance, which is sort of freaks me out a little bit, right?
Your whole body's stress system has to be on alert, but you feel like you have the resources to meet it. Then you enter what's called a challenge state. You are harnessing your body's resources to do well. Am I just a bad manager? Or are all these kids idiots, right? Give you a belief in the possibility of change under the right conditions. I think the truth is that nobody does that, or almost nobody does that without a great coach or a great mentor. What a growth mindset is very simply.
In this episode of Headspace, we have a conversation with Dr. David Yeager. He's professor of psychology at UT Austin. He's one of the world's leading researchers into mindset and motivation. His latest book is 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People. We talk about good stress versus bad stress, growth mindset, the power of story, the qualities of high performers, and much, much more. Welcome to Headspace. Do you want to become more self-aware and clear about your goals? Try our free Xponential score. In just 5 minutes, get a high-level picture of where you stand in key life dimensions. Get your personal life score at xponential.life/score. David, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you are one of the world's leading researchers on mindset and motivation. Do you stumble into something like that? Is there an origin story?
Yeah, my story is a little weird. I started out as a middle school teacher of all things, and I was teaching middle school English in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and also K through 8 PE. I worked with kids in all different kind of capacities. I was also the after school basketball coach. I ran the book club, the computer club, and I also maintained the local area network. So I was the one who would run Cat5 cable through the attic to fix Ethernet when it broke. And so, but wearing many hats, you're interacting with kids in a lot of different ways. And in general, it's just frustrating when you're doing everything you can, working 90 hours a week, and it's still hard to budge them. Like you just couldn't get them to be curious or love learning or, not complain about their grades or whatever it was. I just felt like the training I was getting wasn't clear enough with respect to its recommendations, or it was just kind of wrong or wooden-headed. And so I left the classroom in part because I wanted to give very, very concrete advice for people who had the same kind of frustrations that I did. And I ended up at Stanford, which was great. It was a highly ranked program, which meant there's just a lot of opportunities that you can't anticipate until you get there. And I stumbled into Carol Dweck's class, not knowing who she was, never heard of mindset before in my life. And I was hooked. And I somehow got Carol to work with me. She wasn't initially my advisor. And then she's never been able to get rid of me since. So I lead a lot of the main mindset research studies that are testing mindset at a large scale in different contexts now. But it all's kind of like an accident and coming from just a frustration with how useful the advice was and feeling like we needed to do a better job.
So that leads obviously to the book that you're about to launch. I think it's in the summer of 2024, right? And it's basically, the title is
August
10 to 25, August 6th, 10 to 25, the Science of Motivating Young People. Do you find that the sort of the Gen Z group of people is a completely separate sort of mindset subset? Or is it just us old people complaining about the young people like we have for all of the history of humanity?
Yeah.
Or both.
Right. It's a great question. I mean, there are obvious differences. There's technology that didn't exist a few years ago even. Mm-hmm. There are ideas in our culture that weren't popular and that maybe were around, around inclusion and equity, ideas about social justice, about the global warming, about a good workplace. The information economy is a little different, but the fundamental realities of how to reach young people have not changed. And the reason why is that they're rooted in the basic neurobiological realities that come from evolution. And there has been no natural selection to change human adolescent brains in the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, that kind of stuff set 100,000 or more years ago.
But
Uh,
wouldn't you say that? I mean, obviously the foundation is the same, but the environment is massively different. Do you feel like there's a there's a lesser, like a significantly less motivation in kids? Are they more fragile? I mean, those are the stereotypes flying around, right?
yeah. Yeah. I think the stereotype is that now Gen Z feels entitled to get a certain kind of rights without having earned anything, without having worked hard or earned a reputation.
Hmm.
Um, and I talk to a lot of business owners, both in retail and in corporate settings, and they're really frustrated with the next generation. And so it definitely feels different to a lot of managers.
Does
But
research support that, or is this?
it what it supports is that people complain more about it now than before. It doesn't support the idea that
Yeah,
what works to motivate young people is any different than before.
yeah, yeah.
Um, the conversations that they're having are a little different. So they're more aware that it's not enough to just hate your job and collect a paycheck and wait to be
Hmm.
happy until after 5 p.m. when you cash your paycheck and go to the bowling alley or whatever happened in the 70s and 80s. Uh, the, that kind of argument of you need to hate your life until at least your 30s and your compensation for disliking your work life is your paycheck. That's just less compelling to young people.
Interesting.
And
Yeah, but
but
it's
but
just
that's not
it's
because they're
basically values and a little bit of a different cultural environment, but fundamentally that's not different, I don't think. Then.
no, I mean you can see people talking about this in the 1950s when they're talking about factory workers, like
Right.
McGregor,
Yeah, yeah.
a prominent management theorist, was writing about this. So you can see the same stuff going back to Plato and Aristotle. It's not
Yeah. Oh,
really
that's good. Well,
that
that's
different.
helpful to
Yeah.
hear. And the thing is, I have three daughters, and none of them fit that stereotype. Not none of the three. So I look at them and I go, "Well, you turned out okay. What's the problem here?" Um,
Yeah,
so
for as
interesting.
long as there have been teenagers, there have been
Yeah,
adults complaining that teenagers
complaining
are
about
lazy,
teenagers.
selfish,
Okay.
and entitled. Now, but what is different is, that young people are simply more aware of alternative possibilities for how they could interact with their bosses. So
That's
they
right.
do expect more. And I
Hmm.
don't know if it's entitlement because a lot of what they're asking for is just to be respected and taken seriously and given a little flexibility. And I think people have always wanted that.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's good. That's a good point. Okay, so let's talk about growth mindset, which is obviously a buzzword. What is it, and what is it not? Since it's everybody and their mother uses this term, and you
Right.
know
It's really
about
been
this.
amazing since we
Yeah.
started conducting the first field trials and getting a lot of press on this work 15 years ago. It's really blown up. The What a growth mindset is very simply the belief that you can grow and develop your abilities with the right experiences and support. And that's the opposite of a fixed mindset. Was the idea that your ability in some domain is fixed and can't change no matter what you do. And the I tend to think of the power of growth mindset as mainly counteracting the toxic harm that comes from fixed mindset thinking. That it's just really bad if you're in the middle of a difficulty, whether it's personal or social or medical or intellectual, to think this is so bad and it will never change.
Yeah.
That's that's a despairing thought. And so what we do with growth mindset is we give you a reason to doubt that very negative fixed mindset interpretation, give you a belief in the possibility of change under the right conditions and with the right support. What has happened is that growth mindset has become a buzzword that can be used to like bludgeon people and tell them, hey, you should love all this critical feedback I'm giving you where I'm telling you you're the worst employee ever because you should
Mm.
have a growth mindset.
Yeah.
And it's a way of justifying managers' kind of toxic behaviors. This is kind of what happened at Microsoft. They did a lot of great stuff with growth mindset, but the interviews I did with managers there showed me a lot of performance reviews would be an hour of your manager telling you all your flaws as an employee. And if you didn't say thank you and ask for more, then they would also add to your performance review doesn't have a growth mindset, right?
Yeah.
And so it's growth mindset is not an excuse for you to be toxic. It's also not endless positive thinking. Growth mindset doesn't mean, hey, tomorrow everything's going to be dramatically different if I just wish it to be to be true. There has to be some agency and some action, and you need some support in order for you to grow. But it does mean that you believe growth is possible with the right supports.
I see people in growth mindset every week. That's one of the things that I do as a coach. So people have paid significant amounts of money to come and be coached. Obviously, they're in growth mindset. And yet, if you go like a layer or two down, they can get paralyzed, right, every once in a while. And to me, I'm actually very, very curious about what would you offer as like very practical things. Okay, if somebody is generally speaking, yes, they're like all in. They're very, very intentional. They show up lack of confidence. It could be, look, this is too deep. I don't want to go here. It's a little painful, or I don't want to put myself out there. Fear of failure. All the dimensionality of sort of self-sabotaging sort of behavior and thinking, not on the surface, but I think at the core, somebody is in growth mindset. I believe that to be true. And yet these things still happen. What are some of the sort of mechanisms, perhaps levers?
The reason why a growth mindset can be effective under the right conditions is because it changes the meaning of experiences. Yeah. So when you're, I don't know, creating a presentation to present to senior VPs and you want to crush it, but it's like not coming together. It's really hard. You have to go learn some new data science thing to create a new plot that you forgot all the Python you learned in college and you just can't do it. And in those moments of crisis where you're really struggling, or, say you're trying to get better at being a manager, and no matter what you say to your Gen Z employees, they still seem to get offended. And you can't tell if am I just a bad manager or are all these kids idiots, right?
Yeah.
And like any of those struggles, there's something called a secondary appraisal. So it's not just what is the event, but what does the event mean about me and as a manager or me as a high performer? And that's not just true at work, it's true in parenting too. Parents are mostly mad about what their children's misbehavior means. Like when your kid's throwing a tantrum in public, you're like, all these other strangers are judging me as a bad parent. And I'm extra mad at my kids for making me look terrible. Yes. This happened to me on Sunday. Like I was coaching baseball practice and my son walked away and like took a 4-year-old's bike and started riding around on it. And then everyone was screaming and crying. And I'm like, I'm the kind of parent who can't control my child like that. Like, and I was mainly mad about that. I wasn't mad about the bike. I was mad about how I looked. Right. Yeah. So once you realize that most of what we're angry about is what something means, not what the actual event is. Mm-hmm. Then you realize, all right, well, there's usually a different way of making meaning out of it, a different way of thinking about it. And often the way to think differently about it is to tell yourself a different story, because what we're mad about is the story of ourselves and our identities in this context. I'm the kind of parent who has unruly children. I'm the kind of boss who Gen Z employees hate. It's a story you're telling yourself. So you can actually borrow the tools of storytelling to help people adopt a different story. In our experiments, we do this, and there's basically 3 or 4 steps, depending on how you want to count it. The first step in a good story, a better growth mindset story, is that the difficulties are common. And in fact, they're common because usually you're doing something that's hard. It's legitimately and genuinely difficult. Reaching across generations, preparing a presentation for senior VPs. Those are ambitious things to do. And if you do them well, it's really impressive. So of course it's hard. If it was easy, then everyone would be promoted as senior VP after their presentations. So the first is like difficulty is common and normal. The second is, how does change happen? Well, usually it happens through some actions people can take and usually some response from the environment. So this next part of the story is you have some agency, you can take some actions to take a step towards growth and improvement. Now, it's not going to happen right away. It's not going to be magic, but there are things that can be done. And the third part of a good story is that when those initial steps are taken, then sometimes there's a snowball effect that over time, early small steps turn into big changes later. Now, again, if all you did is look at a snowball after 1 revolution down the hill, it wouldn't be that much bigger. Right. But after 30 revolutions down the hill, then it's like a cartoon where it's going to blow up Bugs Bunny and cover him with snow or whatever.
It's a virtuous cycle. It goes up, right?
Yeah, but like it's very hard to think about that cycle when you're in the midst of a crisis, because
Yeah.
there's such a huge disparity between how you want to be or how you want to be perceived and where you are now. So you
So
have to believe in the virtuous cycle. So if you get, so the when we do randomized experiments, we give people a story. They always have those three elements. And sometimes we see effects months or years later from a 15, 20-minute intervention.
thinking of two specific episodes in my life that are like, I want to say 25 years apart. Okay.
Okay.
And my question is this: how do you prepare yourself ahead of time for a moment like this to have this outcome over that outcome? So one episode is one of my first career was as a singer, right? So, and of course that's like a massive, like no one succeeds, and you
Right. And you're putting yourself out there all the
yeah,
time for
yeah.
failure.
So I have
Right.
this one, I have this one moment that was a definitive moment for me, because I was part of this show. It was a televised show. It was in sports arena. So I go from nothing, from like tiny audiences to 20,000 people live, and then millions on TV. And I
Yeah.
have my band, my dancers, my backup singers, all of that. We're about to hit the stage, and I remember distinctly that everyone was just losing their minds, because it's sort of, we were like a new group. I was the lead guy, but it was like everybody was freaking out, and I had zero freak out. Like I was completely focused, and I can't remember why. That's sort of the thing, right? I
Yeah.
can't remember why, but I remember that making a huge difference. Now, fast forward 25 years, I run this marketing agency, and I consult for this very fancy organization, at least for me. It's called the NASA Space Grant Consortium. It's basically 50 organizations on social media, marketing, strategy, things like that. And they fly me out to DC. I'm in this room. Literally, the wall is this glass wall, and outside of the window is the Capitol dome. Like it's just prime real estate. In the
Yeah.
room, it's an oak. There's an oak conference table, like this massive one, and there's 30 PhD scientists at the head of the table. The presiding person is a Nobel Prize winner, and I'm telling them about Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and all those things. And I just remember going, stuttering quite a bit, you know,
Yeah.
because I didn't feel like I belonged there. Although I knew what I was talking about, I had done my research, got all the stats. I was working with somebody on their side, so I was very confident in the stuff that I was bringing to the table. But I just remember feeling very inadequate,
Yeah.
and I sort of it was okay, but it was not. It was not like, I look back and I go, man, I could have done this so much better, and I don't know what
Yeah.
happened there. So can you tell me, what would you do, right? If you were sort of consulting me like a
Yeah.
month before I was doing this thing.
From a scientific perspective, the first is a scenario in which it was very demanding, but you felt like you had the resources to meet that demand, or you were
Yeah.
very confident you did.
Hmm.
Your musical ability, you had probably rehearsed the hell out of that performance. You
Yeah.
had probably handpicked like kick-ass musicians and singers and backup dancers and everything. And you probably had a sense of how that audience was going to react because you had done it so many times before.
Yeah.
And so just having more people who are going to think the same stuff that you already know doesn't typically feel more demanding. And so there are times in our lives where we have these peak experiences that are super demanding,
Yeah.
and we're high arousal, heart's racing, palms are sweaty or whatever, but you don't have like the kind of dread butterflies in your stomach. You have more like excitement, like an awesome surfer that is about to
Yeah.
catch
It's
like a kick-ass
adrenaline,
wave.
it's excitement, is
Yeah.
it's hyper focus. I remember that.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in
And you can
athletes that
probably remember the details really well
I
because
do. Yeah,
the
I do.
hippocampus actually, it's
Hmm.
called a spotlight memory, that your brain remembers subtle details, so sometimes even just smells, right?
Yes.
From those spotlight moments.
I actually remember the smell of the lights in the smoke machine. There's a very
Yeah.
particular smell, right?
Right. Yeah. So like there's all kinds of stuff from the cognitive science of memory that suggests that if you are in a state of very high demand, like your whole body's stress system has to be on alert, but
Hmm.
you feel like you have the resources to meet it, then you enter what's called a challenge state, or challenge type stress. And I write about this in chapter 8 in the book. And this is classic biopsychosocial model, Jim Blaskovich. I learned this stuff from Jeremy Jameson at Rochester. But the basic idea is that it's not no stress or low stress. It's high stress, but it's positive stress because you are you are harnessing your body's resources to do well. And if we would have had you hooked up to our biopsychosocial measurements, like if you were in the lab, what you would see was like a lot of blood getting to your extremities, like less blood in the chest cavity and more blood in the periphery. And if we could have a little indicator in the oxygenated to test the oxygen levels in your blood and your brain, you would see that you're getting more oxygen to your muscles, more oxygen to your brain, which causes that hyperfocus, allows you to remember, and your muscles do better with reproducing their muscle memory when you're in that challenge type state. Now, a very different state is, of course, no stress, but there it doesn't matter how confident you are because there's no arousal, there's no physiological turn on switch. So usually the opposite in our research of a challenge type state is a threat type state. And a threat type state is when there's very high demand, but you're not certain that you have the resources to meet that high demand, that there's a disparity between your level of confidence and the demand you're facing.
And it's perceived demand.
It's the
right?
perceived demand and perceived support or resources.
And so, because the reason I ask is because in the second scenario that I was describing to you, I was very confident in what I was saying. I was just thinking these are very, very, very smart people, like way above my pay grade in their field. They're like, one of the ladies told the Mars rover where to go every day, and I knew that in advance, which is sort of freaks me out a little bit, right? And then there's where it was. There's some sort of lobbying firm, and there was the Capitol Dome right out the window.
So the way a psychologist would think about that is you weren't uncertain of your knowledge of your domain, but the internal contents of the thoughts of the people judging you were opaque to you. Because if it's not an audience where you've heard them think out loud about how they're judging you, it's very hard to know if you're winning them over or not, especially if they're sitting there kind of critical, with like flat affect. So in our experiments, we use a task called the Trier social stress test, where we make people give an impromptu speech without telling them beforehand. And we're like, surprise, in 3 minutes, you have to give a speech to other people a little bit older than you about what makes someone your age popular and likable. And then we bring in these judges who we have trained to sit there with clipboards and have flat affect like this. They're not mean, but they're
neutral.
You can't win them over because we've trained them to not give you these nonverbal cues of I'm listening and I'm like impressed. And what we find is that most people show an increase in threat type stress, which you can see by constriction in the blood vessels in the capillaries that are going to the extremities. And it's kind of interesting how you do it. We send an electrical signal across your chest cavity, and depending on how full your chest cavity is with blood, the signal goes slower or faster. And so we basically calculate how much volume of blood there is in your chest cavity relative to heartbeat and so on, but as a measure of how stressed out you are in a negative way. And what you find is that if you think that there's very high demand and very low support, then you're in a threat type state, and then your body keeps more blood centrally. And that
the
means
support is the response of the people you're interacting with, correct?
The psychologists I say support publicly, but in the research literature, we call it resources. It's resources to meet perceived resources to meet perceived demand.
Got it. Okay.
And one resource is your skill, but another resource is your knowledge of how people tend to think of you and what their reactions are. Also, the support that they're giving you non-verbally. And in my book, I write about someone who went to this is in chapter 10, went to a physics PhD program coming from San Antonio, and she was very confident when she was singing mariachi band growing up. But then she did her physics PhD at Vanderbilt and then got a job at NASA. And they're not on the rovers. They're doing more like looking at planets, atmospheres to try to find habitable planets. And she's super nervous when she gets in the room with all the NASA scientists. And what we've found, we've done experiments on this, is that the way to increase your perceived resources or your perceived support is to actually rename your stress arousal as a resource. So that racing heart, that so sweaty palms, that deeper breathing, that's actually your body mobilizing resources to help you do well. Like the reason why your palms are sweaty is to cool you down so your body's more efficient inside. The reason why you're breathing more is getting more oxygen in your blood. and then your heart's racing to get that blood to your extremities, especially your brain. And so we tell people, you can think of that stress as your body's way of preparing to do really well. And this builds on a long line of research. I'm not taking credit for all of it. Ali Crum did a lot of this, Jeremy Jameson. But what we found is that you can actually increase perceived resources and put you in a challenge type state without addressing like a skill deficit or changing the judgers, but simply giving you the psychological feeling that your own internal body's resources are there to help you, not hurt you.
Interesting. So even if you don't control the perceived response, for example, the two scenarios I gave you, one, I feel like what you're saying is very interesting because I sort of predicted that the crowd is going to go wild, right? So I was
Yeah.
confident in that. With a bunch of Nobel Prize winner PhD types, in the room, in a lobbying firm in DC, I was so much out of my element that I had no idea how they're going to respond. Is there any way to sort of mitigate that? I guess that's sort of like a practical question beyond
Yeah.
sort
I
of
mean,
the okay,
you,
I'm
yeah.
nervous, I'm getting resources, but then I'm still staring at a bunch of people who have no idea what I'm talking about. Actually, I I can remember that most of those people around the table didn't care actually,
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think that the idea is that, the reason why you are not confident in that setting is because you care about doing a good job and
that's right.
you care about having these people actually learn from what you're saying. You're not just there to collect a paycheck.
Yeah,
And so the first step, again, this is storytelling, is remind yourself, I'm nervous because I'm doing something legitimately hard that's outside of my comfort zone, that often is the reason why you became an expert in your field, is to share it with other experts in other fields.
that's
And
right.
so you're getting to do exactly what you spent years and years preparing to do. So that's an exciting opportunity.
Oh, I
And
like
if you
that.
weren't,
Uh-huh.
if you
Uh-huh.
weren't afraid, then it'd be like, well, you're not doing something awesome and cool at the frontiers of your field. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the first step. And then the second step is, the fact that you're nervous, it isn't just a good sign that you chose to do something hard. It's also your body's way of helping you do something that matters to you. So you have to trust your body's resources and use them rather than fight against them. And we did a series of experiments we published in Nature a few years ago where we said that those two messages, we call it synergistic mindset. And the first is the growth mindset message that you're doing something hard because you're growing and learning and you're showing your skills. And the second is a stress can be enhancing mindset, which is the idea that your body's like arousal and so on is a resource. It's not a liability. When you got that combo, and then we put people into that speech task where they had to impress the people with the clipboards, not only do they do better, but they had lower cortisol levels. They're more likely to they have different blood flow. Their blood's flowing to their extremities more. We can see it in their skin conductance, the way that their sweat either stays aroused or returns to baseline. So we just that message preemptively before we surprise you with making you give a speech. And by the way, we then make them do mental math, count backwards from 968 in increments of 17. They do better on that stuff if we give you these double mindsets of growth mindset and stress enhancing.
And stress enhancing. I love that. That is fantastic. And it resonates with me so much because when I work with people, one of the threads that I use in the program, in the conversations, and the sort of sessions is that we are the stories we tell. Like
Yeah.
ultimately, that's just how the human being is
Yeah.
wired to
And you can
be.
change your story.
And you can change the story. And as a matter of fact, you can even change the past by reinterpreting the story of the past, which is actually
That's
a
true. I
really
mean,
powerful thing.
look at survivors of trauma or abuse. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Uh-huh.
really this is classic Janoff-Bullman research in the 1970s that led to CBT and DBT as therapies. That who are the people who coped well in adulthood despite abuse in childhood, and it's the
Mm-hmm.
people who told themselves a certain story. Namely, they didn't say the story of I'm a bad person, I'm shameful, and I deserved it. If you
Yeah.
don't tell yourself that story,
And
you
that's the
tend to be more
course.
resilient.
I'm actually very curious. Can we dive into that a little bit?
Sure.
Past stories. And the reason I tell you is that because I teach this and I train this all the time. I was a refugee at age 5. Like literally, my dad was in a concentration camp. I moved 4 countries by age 7, like 3 continents. Right? I've seen civil war, all kinds of stuff. And all of that stuff. I actually interpret most of it as superpowers for the things that I do now, creatively, professionally, relationally as well, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And the sort of signature things that I've really worked really hard on in helping high performers is basically saying, look, this is my story. Yours is probably less intense, but see how this has really strengthened me. Let's work on your story,
Yeah.
and let's reinterpret your trauma in a way that you can. It's not, and the thing is, it's not a trick. It's true, actually.
Yeah.
It's But because it's so familiar, you don't think of it as an asset. You think of it more of a as a shameful thing, something that you don't want to think about. Are there
Yeah.
any
Or
specific
yeah.
tricks to accelerate that, enhance that, help people get there quicker? I'm asking for my own,
No,
this
for
is
sure. I mean,
my own
we
benefit.
did an experiment on this. We took kids from very low income neighborhoods who were attending an urban charter school that was geared toward kids from families that had very little money, and we wanted to figure out how can we get young people to tell themselves a more resilient story of their past and their experiences either with poverty or oppression and so on, so that way they're prepared to do well in school and go to college. Because the big issue is a lot of the high performing high schools that are in communities of with lots of kids in poverty can get kids to graduate high school, but the college graduation rates are abysmal. So it's almost like they're not carrying over the resilience and grit that they might have learned taking
Mm.
pre-cal in high school once they get to college and they're taking, physics and trying to be an engineer or whatever. So what we did is we took kids from this urban charter school and we thought, what if we could help you tell yourself a story about experiences you've had that have been difficult so that you then view them prospectively as assets and resources that have given you strengths rather than liabilities. So what we did is we randomized kids to get uh, 8 days of summer camp, which sounds like it would just be fun, but a good summer camp is mostly facing your fears. So it's like climbing the ropes course. A lot of these kids couldn't swim. They're 13, 14, and they're riding jet skis. They're learning how to ski. So they're like afraid of drowning, right? But a counselor creates enough safety where they get on the jet ski. They're playing, like rich kid sports like lacrosse for the first time and worried about looking like idiots in front of the other rich kids. And anyway, there's a lot of fears you have to face. Weird customs at camp, like the torch lighting ceremony at the end of the night. That's weird. Or the cheers that they do. And, it's just like very foreign for kids and they feel like outsiders. But by the end of the 8 days, they know all the cheers. They know all the customs. They've water skied for the first time. They've painted for the first time. They've made 15 new friends from all different walks of life. And then they go home. And the question is, how can you reframe all those fears you had to overcome and difficult, adverse experiences as assets and resources going forward? So, what we also did, in addition to giving them the camp, is every night the counselors had a reflection on, and we just picked two themes: tenacity and purpose. And we could have picked different ones, but we wanted to label it something that could plausibly transfer to school. And we're like, all right, what are the things you did today that required tenacity to do? What are the things you did today that had a sense of purpose? Like you contributed to others, you supported others, you were larger than yourself. And they did that every night. And then at the end of camp, they got a letter from the counselor that said, here are all the things I saw you do. Those are examples of you having tenacity and purpose. And then in October, when they're back in school, they had to write a reflection on what they did that summer to show tenacity and purpose. And so they had to then explain how ropes course was kind of like learning trigonometry or factoring trinomials in math or learning chemistry or physics. So they had to build the bridge from the previous adverse experiences to the new ones. We call that transfer. And then the study was over. And then years later, we looked up whether they went to college. And we found that they were 10 or more percentage points more likely to go to college. And by some rates, the numbers are really low. That's 50 to 100% improvement over the base rates years later. And in the book, in chapter 12, I actually caught up with a bunch of these kids like 8 years later. And I interviewed
Wow,
them.
you did.
And they didn't know that I had designed the camp or that they had been randomly assigned. They just thought they won like a lottery to go to free camp.
Okay.
And I contacted them through the charter school, but they didn't know who I was. And I was like halfway through and I asked them about their whole lives, and they had these amazing stories of resilience they showed, like learning trombone, switching to drums and back to trombone, and then being a jazz musician, but working night shifts at Walmart, being their first to graduate in their family, all that kind of stuff. Just amazing stories. And at the end, I was always like, by the way, did you go to summer camp when you were in 6th grade? And they're like,
Oh,
oh yeah,
wow.
I think about summer camp every single day.
Is that
Like,
right?
and they had no idea that I was interviewing them. And so I end the book with stories of 3 of these kids, all first generation students, all from low income families. And they have learned to tell themselves a story of grit, resilience, tenacity, and purpose that they used in so many ways. And they told me about without knowing the connection. And it spilled over to all these areas of life. So my big takeaway is any experience that was hard to overcome and it required you to dig deep can be a asset and resource for you going forward. It can make you have more perceived resources to meet more perceived demand, but only if you draw the link, because it's not obvious on the surface why water skiing is anything like stoichiometry in high school chemistry
And
class.
that's what you call transfer, right? Is that the term?
That's
Mhm.
well, in order to transfer, you have to have a layer up of abstraction. You basically
Got it.
have to name your previous experience as an abstract skill and
Hmm.
then apply it by analogy. So it's a
Got it.
kind of analogical reasoning task that kids do not do naturally, first of all, but especially kids experiencing poverty don't do it. And the reason why is that mainstream society just feels very closed off, like it's not for them. And it wasn't designed for people in poverty at all, right? It's designed for lots of other reasons. So they don't feel invited to bring their assets from overcoming obstacles as a kid to college or the workplace or whatever. But managers can do that. You can be like, you have amazing resilience. Like, look at what you've overcome. That's why I want you on this team.
Right.
Rather than I only want the elite Princeton kids who played lacrosse on the team because they're the only ones who are smart and resilient enough. It's like there's tons of resilience in lots of people that are it's underappreciated. And if you bring that out as a manager, people feel valued, but they also can be motivated by that and more resilient.
Do you find that just like it is with kids, let's say kids in poverty, right? I understand that, but that when there are grown-ups maybe in their 30s to maybe to mid 40s that have enough, you know, being kicked in the teeth by life, where they develop this a similar set of limiting beliefs
Yeah.
that even if they want to progress on, like, let's change careers or do something daring or just step outside, draw outside the lines, there are these paralyzing sort of, this is not me, this is
Yeah.
this other person. Do you find that similar? Does it transfer the set of limitations from, let's say, young
I mean,
poor kids to middle class,
oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I think
burned
the
out
poor kids is
professionals?
just like
Yeah,
it's a focal example. There's nothing
that's
special
right.
about it. I think that I mean, look, what you're describing is a real experience. There's no, I don't want to dismiss it in any way. I mean, I have friends who had a slightly different pattern where they were the top of their field and then kind of lost their mojo
Hmm.
and for a few years, a lot of combination of personal and professional just frustrations. And then they're like, that person who was successful and had that great CV, that's not me anymore. That's a different person. It's
Right.
almost like Bob Dylan later in life being like, yeah, 60s Bob Dylan was great. And I'm not 60s Bob Dylan anymore, you
Hmm.
know? And I think that's a real thing. And we shouldn't just, it's not just you can overcome that with the power of wishful thinking. At the same time, you know, growth mindset it is something that gives you the courage to take the risk of learning something new. And it's not about who you are, it's like who you could become, right?
That's right. Hmm.
And one major limiting belief is I can't become anyone else. And that belief comes from a good place. It comes from having paid attention to your past failures, right? I mean, for someone who gets all D's in math, and it's like it's reasonable for them to be like, I'm not going to be a mathematician
Yeah,
because they were
it's
paying
not illegal.
attention to
Yeah,
all those
yeah,
D's.
yeah.
You know, it's not idiotic, uh, but it does limit, and oftentimes people they don't know what they're capable of. So I don't know if you know this, but Angela Duckworth told me that right before Anders Ericsson died. Anders Ericsson, of course, came up with the 10,000 hour rule, deliberate practice, which is the way that you become great at something over
And then
time.
Angela isn't
Right.
she's sort of the one who wrote Grit and
She
something like
wrote
that.
Grit, and
Yeah,
she
yeah,
focuses on how to
yeah.
become great at things and also how to persevere.
Okay.
Under said something right before he died. He said, I wrote all this stuff about the 10,000 hours and deliberate practice. And I think the truth is that nobody does that, or almost nobody does that without a great coach or a great mentor.
Is that
And
right?
yeah. And I think it's because at some point you could convince yourself you've done something good enough or hard enough, but the third party helps you to see that you need to keep working on your flaws deliberately.
Mm-hmm.
And I raise that because sometimes you need a mentor to see who you could become. And it doesn't have to be a mentor like the person you have coffee with on Tuesdays or a formal mentoring, but just somebody who's invested in your improvement and helping you see that you could be better than you are right now. And
Interesting.
so it's not just a growth mindset. It's also, I think, sparked by experiences with great mentors. And that's kind of why I wrote the book, that I think there's
Wow.
the idea of locating excellent performance and improvement only in the traits of the superstar leader, I think isn't quite right. And even Anders Ericsson didn't think that. I think there has to be a place for a mentor or a leader or someone else in your life who sees you for who you could become, pushes you, like increases the demand, but also increases support so that way you can meet that higher demand.
It's fascinating that you bring this up, and inspiring and fascinating, and it rings true. I literally today, we're all in the whole Olympic spirit, right, place. So I watch Olympics every day, a few minutes. But it's sort of some memories bubbled up because I've actually mentored and coached several Olympic athletes. So I did this whole post on the qualities that distinguish just a a talented athlete or performer and an extraordinary one that would go to the Olympics, right? And so I was thinking about it because it's just from my memories, and I sketched some stories to illustrate it. And one of the I think the most distinguishing thing in that list of five that I came up with was coachability. Because I've coached people in all kinds of fields, but the athletes, actually, of all high performers, the athletes are my favorite because they have this hyper humility, coachability, this intense focus, if they accept you as a coach, to literally obey. Like it's not like, yeah, just tell me your opinion. Maybe I will, maybe I won't pay attention. No, they literally have, all of them had this thing where I would look at a guy. I describe it in the video that a guy could kill me with his bare hands, like this bear of a guy, right? He was a wrestler, and I would say something to him, and he would not push back, not question, and literally do everything I say. And to me, that always was just particularly extraordinary,
Yeah.
specifically about athletes, right?
I mean, I guess I want to add two things to that. One is that you must have been good at building trust, because people don't blindly listen
Right.
when it's their livelihood or their main identity and you're asking them to change stuff. And everyone knows if you start changing your form or your technique or whatever it
Yeah.
is,
Uh-huh.
you could mess it up and get the yips and then be worse than you were
Yeah.
before. Right. And so that's why golfers are so particular about their shots, and basketball players and so on. And so building trust is like the first point. And in my book, I write about the NBA's best shooting coach, Chip England, who was responsible for the Spurs' long run of championships. And so, like when Tony Parker was drafted, he was such a bad shot that every time he took a shot, Greg Popovich, the coach of the Spurs, would say in his head, "That's a turnover." Right. And now he's a Hall of Famer. And like Kawhi Leonard used to shoot over his shoulder rather than in proper form.
Uh-huh.
And like people, that's why he got drafted in the 20s rather than top 5 pick. And nobody thought he had a good shot. But these guys and others, Shane Battier, Steve Kerr, Grant Hill, all these guys worked with Chip. And he's like a one-man Moneyball strategy. They could draft players with flaws and he could make them into superstars. And I sat down with Chip at some Mexican food place in a strip mall in San Antonio. Like, not a nice place, but it's very interesting conversation. He's a great down to earth guy. And he was like, the first thing is you have to sell your vision. He's like, some 18-year-old who just got drafted as a lottery pick is not going to change their shot and potentially give away millions of dollars by listening to some 50-year-old just because I said so.
Yeah.
Like, I have to sell my vision. And he doesn't sell his vision with his credentials. He's not like, well, I'm good enough for Steve Kerr, I should be good enough for you. He doesn't say that kind of stuff. Instead, he starts with the strengths that the player already has, and he finds a way to complement those before he points out what they need to fix. And then what he does is he makes the progress feel super attainable, because it feels like small things that he's changing. It's not like, I'm going to break your shot down, it's all wrong, and we're going to build it back up from scratch. And then the last is his goal is to give you a coach in the head. So he doesn't want you to just comply for that hour. He wants you to know how to push yourself and practice the other 23 hours of the day, and the other 6 days of the week you're not getting coached by him. And so I think about that a lot, that yes, as an athlete, you have to be coachable, but a good coach can take any player and build trust and sell a vision for why they should want to be better that makes sense to them from their perspective, and then give them the tools to continue pushing themselves even when the coach isn't in their ear. And I think that's why these players grow so much, is because area under the curve, they have way more hours that they're getting better.
Right. Yeah.
And I think a great manager does that too. You don't want the only productive minutes of an employee in the week to be the 30 minutes in their meeting with you. You want all of the minutes to be really great.
Yeah, to stay the coach in his head. That's a great term. I'm gonna steal that. So if we can for a second reverse the angle from the coach to the recipient, right? The coachee, I guess. What I don't know what the term
Mentee.
is. Mentee, exactly. In the same way that I find athletes to be particularly intuitive about this and basically coachable, I also find lack of coachability, not because of necessarily pride, but there can be a sense of almost like passivity, like there's a numbness, I guess, that I see in people that can benefit, that are actually around incredibly smart people, and they just don't. They have these resources right there,
right?
And they just don't. They don't take it. And the question, I guess, if we reverse the angle, what would it take to get somebody like that to pay attention and go, dude, you have like gold right there, or to change their mindset, I guess.
Yeah, I teach a whole class on this kind of problem.
Did you?
That
okay.
I mean, I do every semester at UT. The basic idea is that all the time in life, there are good things waiting for us that we don't take advantage of. And usually, if you look at people's response to that, it's to make an argument for why you should go use the good thing. In this case, it's a great coach or mentor who's there for you. But it's everything from like tax credits the government's giving to, extra health benefits at work, to, in my class, office hours. Like, people hardly even come to office hours. And like, you've got me, I can talk to you for free as long as you want. And that's, you've already paid for that, as a part of the college tuition. And like, it's 2 people, right?
Yeah.
So in general, there's a behavior change problem. Or, vaccine uptakes. Everyone's like, I need the vaccine. But then once they have it, 30% are like, no, I'm fine, I'm not going to get it. It's like, you go on and on and on. And what I always say is like, look, let's do a systems analysis. So, okay, first, did they want that thing? If the answer is no, then they need to be sold on it. They need to be told why it's great. But a lot of times they want it, but there are barriers preventing them from getting it. And those barriers could be one of 2 things. They could be psychological, or they could be logistical. And logistical, sometimes you want to access some mentor, but it just feels hard to get on their schedule or their time, or maybe they're busy, or you feel guilty because they have kids and you don't want to bother them with, or, that kind of stuff. But psychological is different. And psychological could be a tax on asking for help, or it could be a subsidy for the alternative. So this is classic Dale Miller behavioral science I'm sharing with you, by the way. But the tax would be something like, if I'm the kind of person who has to go ask for help, then it means I'm in general a weak and worthless person, right? Or I'm a leech or a drain on this other person. Or like, if I was truly a top performer and I absolutely kicked ass, I wouldn't need to ask for help, because it would be obvious to me what I should be doing to do really well. So the fact that I'm asking for help means I'm a mediocre person. And sometimes it's easier for people to convince themselves to hide their flaws and then tell themselves a story that they're great because they never asked for help, than it is to go ask for help. So what's underlying that? And there are like a few different reasons why people think that way. One, of course, is the fixed mindset thinking that if you show any kind of flaw or limitation, then it means that you like lack potential or lack ability. Um, but there are other reasons too. And I think that a big thing that happens is that whatever kind of improvement or growth or task they're supposed to be doing has been sold to them in a way where it's only about their long-term self-interest. And this gets to the subsidy point, that there are just more fun ways to spend your time than to go ask for a bunch of critical feedback, right? Or to self-improve. And if the only reason why you're doing it is to get something for yourself in the future that's ambiguous and may not come to you, that often can't compete with the good feeling right now of taking it easy.
So it's
Like
delayed
taking it easy,
gratification. Yeah.
taking it easy is 100% chance of feeling good.
Right.
And like pushing yourself and working on your flaws is 100% chance of feeling bad now, and a less than 100% chance of paying off later. Because a lot of people practice things and don't get better.
That's right.
So when performance and development is only framed in terms of a potential raise in the future, potential promotion, or better reputation, all those things have a less than 100% chance of happening, and they're in the future. So it's like saying, don't eat the marshmallow now for a 25% chance of 2 marshmallows in 5 years.
Yeah. Delayed gratification is
and that discount rate thinking doesn't work for most people. So what we always do, and I have a chapter on this in the book, is we focus on purpose. And that's why we do it, is we say, well, okay, but improving right now is awesome, and it looks cool, and it's impressive, and not everyone does it. And you get to be the kind of person who does something that is better than what a lot of people are doing, right? That's one way of talking about purpose. Another is, hey, there's people counting on you, and other people are going to be happier, better off, right? Whether it's the company or other employees, et cetera, if you're better at your job, or it could be the constituents, right? So the more that there's an example in our, in my book about a grocery store, where there's this one manager. It's in Norway. It's called OBS. And I found like the world's greatest grocery store manager. So there are no young people goofing off, smoking weed in the back room, fake working and taking naps. Like, doesn't happen there. It happens in most American grocery stores, not in Ole's.
I was not aware of that. So now I know. Every time I go to HEB, I'm going to think about that young person.
No, HEB is really good, actually. Whole Foods is not. Yeah.
Okay.
But in other grocery stores are not good, but HEB's towards the top. So is Wegmans in the US in the East Coast.
Good to know.
But anyway, so I found this guy, and I talked to this like 21-year-old who, she had been slacking because she got bad habits from a 55-year-old who was her pseudo supervisor for a while. And Ole called her in the office and kind of chewed her out. And I was like, so did you quit? Did you yell at him? Did you like fake work? Were you passive aggressive? And she's like, no, why would I do that? I'm like, I don't know, because you didn't want to get yelled at. And she's like, no, he wants me to be my best. It's clear to me that he cares about me so much that he won't settle for low performance.
Wow.
And so it became about a supervisor's belief in her potential for excellence. And
what's the difference between chewing her out and coming across as oppressive, sort of, abusive?
He's 110% transparent. So he doesn't make people guess why he's being tough.
He just
every day on the walkie-talkie, he's like, all right, guys, care about all of you. This is what our goals are for today. I'm excited for us to really meet these goals. I want you to get recognition from central office for having been the best staff at any grocery store. And he doesn't take the credit. He makes sure they take the credit. And then he recommends them for leadership training. So you've got non-college educated, kind of like very low education skills, 19-year-olds that are being sent off to central office to learn like management theory and leadership theory, and to bring that back to the grocery store because he believes in your potential. And it just, in a world in which most people look down on you as a retail worker, not college educated, it feels good to be taken seriously. You feel respected, and you feel a sense of purpose. And so I think my recommendation, is a lot of times is that the only reason we've given them to work hard is that marshmallow test. But we could instead have taken the Ole approach and focus on purpose, contribution, prestige, respect, meaning, all those deeper things that, yes, people can be motivated by, despite our stereotypes about them.
So this has been a treasure trove. Thank you so much for sharing all this, and I can't wait to read the book. And what I would like you to do is sort of imagine somebody between, let's say, 25 and 40. This is the time where life gets hard, right, for people. It's all very exciting, 20 to 25, and then there's a shift usually, when things get real, and
Yeah.
and people get into a funk, and sometimes it's this state of stagnation, perhaps paralysis, slow movement. It can last for a decade or so, right? And one of the most painful things that I see when people come into my program is somebody who's been in that state for way too long. What can you tell them about the amazing power of the research that you've done, right? The amazing power of shifting the story, of changing from a fixed to a growth mindset. Are you enjoying this podcast and ready to level up? Discover high performance coaching at Xponential. Visit xponential.life to book your free strategy call. You can tell us where you are, where you want to go. We'll give you free advice. And if it's a good fit, we'll tell you all the amazing results our clients are getting and all the details about Xponential.
I have 4 kids. Like, I have been on a fast professional track as a researcher and scientist, publishing lots of papers and teaching and running, running a lab. And it's just, I remember in my early 30s, my tagline, people would be like, how's it going? I'd be like, well, I'm just deciding which person I care about that I'm going to disappoint first. Cause like, I know I'm going to disappoint someone I care about today.
Exactly.
That's how I felt
Exactly. That's exactly it.
and I mean, just for me, the only way out was to really sit down and honestly organize my life and my staff. And I changed my entire funding plan around the finances for my unit, around hiring great people that did often the things I didn't want to do, but that where they woke up every day and that was their favorite thing to do. And then every dollar I could raise, I spent on keeping those people and making them super happy. And that took years, and it freed me up to do more of the kinds of things I like doing. So, part of it is like, there's no quick fix when so often once you finally commit to your professional trajectory, which can take a while for people because there's so many options. Once you finally commit, it feels like everything you're doing is a quick fix that isn't the deeper solution, because you don't have time to dig up the foundation and read design.
Exactly.
I think there's just a 10-year period in our modern economy where even if you're really successful, things feel a little bit, out of control. And it really is only when you really figure out how you like working and what you need to be successful, that I think then the most successful people I know end up having either staff or collaborators who are really awesome at the things that they don't want to spend their time on or aren't good at. And then they do everything they can to keep those people happy, and it's great collaborators. That's kind of the first thing. But the other thing is to kind of don't work on everything at once, like picking one kind of set of important skills at a time. Right. So if it's just like your meetings are a mess, then just work on that for 6 to 8 months.
So don't dabble, basically. Just develop a skill, get better at it.
I mean, there might be some things you're forced to dabble with, but I would really dedicate to at least one super important central skill that you need to be productive and happy at a time, and like really focus on that until it's habit for you. That's the kind of other point. And the last is more kind of inspirational, which is, a lot of people look back after they're 40 and they look back on their last 15 years and they say, well, I'm proud of the products we rolled out, or I'm proud of the presentations we gave, but like, what legacy did you leave? Like, did you leave behind a legacy of people who thought you were terrible to work with, or that you exploited them, or you treated them like automatons rather than like people? And I guess I'd say that most of the mentors that I respect the most, and several of them I wrote about in my book, they spent lots and lots of time mentoring the next generation, even when they were busy. And it was that next generation of people who became super duper loyal to them in their next phase of their career, who would come back and want to work for them, or who were resources, or you could just call them up when you're stuck on a hard problem. And every year they had a bigger network of people who were grateful for changing their lives. And I wrote about a lot of these people in my book. Steph Akamoto, who's Microsoft's best manager, even when her employees would leave Microsoft, they would then come back 2 years later with promotion 4 levels up because they were so great and they were loyal. And I would say, just personally, things I'm most proud of are like the letters I get from a former postdoc or a mentee or a student where
That's
I
right.
pushed them super hard. They did things they didn't know they were capable of, but now they're a totally different person, and they're out there killing it in the workplace, and they're labeled 30 top 30 under 30. They're winning awards, and they're like, I wouldn't have done this if you didn't see in me the potential to do these things. And that means way more to me than a lot of the papers I wrote. And selfishly, it also means I have people I can turn to if I need help. But even without the selfish part, it just feels great to be that. So I think my main recommendation is like, add some meaning and purpose to your own life in those hard years by making sure you are aligning your resources with young people's well-being. And what you'll find is deep indebted gratitude, because not everyone does that. And then you'll end with this network of people who are going to be at your retirement party, you know, bragging about how great you were when you didn't even know you were doing anything, but you were there for them in ways that went beyond what they expected.
David Yeager, that was a treasure trove. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.